Good evening, everybody. This is the Romeo Village Council special meeting for Monday, November 2nd. It is 7 o'clock. I'm going to call this meeting to order. Would you all please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Roll call, please.
Bartholomew.
Here.
Edwards.
Here.
Fowler. Hart.
Here.
Poznansky.
Here.
Seidel.
Here.
President Malzahn.
Here. Can I get
Six present.
Six present, yes, we have a quorum, thank you. Approval of the agenda, I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll support.
Motion by Hart, support by Seidel. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect. Is there anybody in the audience that wants to address this board under public forum? Come forward now. Okay, hearing none, let's move on. We have no unfinished business. New business, we have one agenda item tonight, the emergency municipal well replacement. Let me start by saying Tim Metz offer his apologies. He was planning to be here. He called me about a half an hour ago. He's having some health problems, and he's not going to make it. He said that if we needed to call him and put him on speakerphone, he'd see if he could answer any questions. So he apologizes that he's not here to speak to you himself. Let me just start by saying that there's a lot of information in your place at your table this evening. I'm sorry, this all sort of came together at the last minute, and it's extremely time sensitive and pressing. So when I sent out the email, I don't know, about a week and a half ago, alerting you all to the fact that this was happening, and then we just waited for reports and time frames and all that stuff to sort of come together. Friday, I had a conference call with Mike McDonald from HRC and Danielle, our HRC, he's their well guy, at HRC, Tim Metz and myself. And during that conversation, we sort of went over all the scenarios. And I said, look, we have a council meeting in 2 weeks. Can we just wait? He said, absolutely not. You need to do this right now. This is how pressing this is. We have one working well. If something happens to that equipment, we have very little backup options. They are. We have the well that's down across from McDonald's. It is not working. It hasn't worked in years. It hasn't supplied any water. It is fed by the worst and the oldest infrastructure, pipes that run right along Van Dyke. It does not flow through the iron removal plant. So all the water that has flown all these years to those users in this southerly direction, if for some reason we had to use that, not only would it not be treated by our iron removal plant, all the stuff that's in the pipes when you change the water and you push it this way, then becomes dislodged. So it's really not an option. I did inquire with Eagle about the Great Lakes water option. We have the tap that's over in Bruce Township. There's a wellhead that's by Amanda Moore. Switching over to Eagle could be a long-term thing that we may want to discuss. I'm switching over to Great Lakes Water. Eagle, however, would require extensive testing. It would increase our rates dramatically because our water rates are still significantly cheaper than Great Lakes water rates. Ask anybody in Washington Township and they'll tell you that. And it's not something that we can reverse back and forth. So if we're going to make that change, then we make that change moving forward, and we would basically abandon all the infrastructure that we have in place. So didn't think that was a very good option, so so we really have none. We have none except for this to get another well put in place. We approved about a month ago an expenditure for Northern Pump and Well to come and do camera testing as part of the maintenance. They noted that the flow testing in that well was not where it should be. So that sort of alerted them that there's probably a potential problem. Doing the camera testing, I think it was about $5,000. That's one thing I didn't look up. They have to actually remove all the equipment out of the well. So they have to remove the pump. They have to remove everything in order to do this camera. It's not like they can just drop it down in a hole. That's why there was such a big expenditure to do that. You have in front of you, and there are some handouts over there, some pictures that they reported back from that finding. You also have a copy of their written report. And I'll read that just in case anybody didn't grab one or anybody watching at home wants to know what they found. Northern Pump and Well performed a video log on well number 3, 10/24/20, at which time we found holes in the casing at various depths. This well was drilled in 1988 by a method called cable tool. With this method, the 12-inch steel casing was mechanically driven to a depth of 136 feet. They then went into the casing and drilled, cable tooled, to a depth of 170 feet where a screen was placed. The casing was not cemented in between the casing and the annulus well bore hole. There is a possibility that surface water may enter the well through the exposed holes at various depths. And you'll see those holes if you look on your pictures. The numbers are the depths of where those pictures were actually taken. And you can see the biggest hole is at 129.7. That's actually the last picture in your packet. But that's sort of what you're looking for those holes. The well is not a candidate to be relined because it has a 12-inch diameter casing. The casing would have to be relined with a minimum of 8-inch steel. Reducing the casing size to 8 inches would not allow for a large enough pump to be placed in the well to continue to produce the amount of water the village would need to meet the current capacity. The state of Michigan Eagle requires all public entities to have a firm capacity that is set by the state for the size of the community. Each one of your wells, if operational, will supply firm capacity with one well out of service, which is approximately 800 GPM. The timeline for the process of drilling a new offset well could take as long as a year before the well could be placed into service. This is because of the permitting process. An application to permit must be filed and approved. The well is then drilled, then testing of the newly drilled well and a permit to equip the new well is completed. So that's their findings. I did also research, and you have some documentation. This well, number 3, was repaired. And again, that last picture that you see at 129 feet, that hole, was one that they detected back in 2009. You have a packet that's lit from the Department of Public Works, and it's signed by Rory, the old DPW supervisor, which basically says, under our 3-year maintenance and inspection of well number 3, a sizable hole was found in the casing at 126 feet, which is the zone of influence. Although repairable, the average lifespan of this type of repair is only 5 to 7 years and does not take into account any future failures in the same zone of influence. Referring to our water history, it's my feeling this well will not be able to meet the 5 to 7 year repair timeline, and in this case, the well would have to be taken out of use. So that's from 2009. So we paid $31,000 to repair that. Also, that's the last page that's in this documentation. That hole back in 2009 that was anticipated to last 5 to 7 years. So we were at 11 years. Clearly, we've gotten our money's worth out of that, which is one reason why it cannot be repaired now, because the repair was already done once, and then by the time I'd have to put that cement casing down inside there, the well wouldn't be big enough. So it also does say that, curiously enough, as it is now, the general maintenance of our 2 wells, approximately $20,000 every 3 years, per well is what they anticipated back then doing it. It would be necessary to monitor and maintain the well more frequently, causing greater cost to the village than the original estimate of $20,000. They suggested that we put together funds to replace the well instead of using that $20,000 for maintenance back then. So we didn't work on having some sort of asset management plan put in place, but that was their suggestion back in 2009. So today, we have Northern Pump and Well, who maintains our infrastructure for us right now. They've been, Lane Northern used to be our well provider, and they went out of business after they installed well number 5 about 10 years ago in the village. Most of those employees went over and then formed this company, Northern Pump and Well, and they've been maintaining our system ever since. They are, from all reports to me, the only municipal well operation in the state of Michigan, which sort of limits us. There were a few others that when I inquired said they did municipal wells, but that's not their primary business in Northern Pump and Well. That's what they do, municipal wells. Like I mentioned, Lane Northern did the install of well number 5. 10 years ago, that was $147,000. So I talked to HRC and I said, what are our options? If we have to put this new well in, I need to get this bid out. I need some other options. I don't know Northern Pump and Well, what do we do? And he said, look, we can do a bid, bid, spec, and build. It'll take about $20,000 or $30,000 to get all those specs put in place, and it will add about 6 months to the install of this well. He said you can send out a bid, but it would be across the country because there are that few municipal well purveyors that we actually can have. So I said, well, who can look at this bid? So we looked up well number 5. We said, geez, 10 years ago was $147,000. Northern Pump and Well can put a new one in because they already maintain our well system. Their bid is $164,578.95. So I asked HRC in their well guide to review that. Review the new proposal from Northern Pump and Well, compare it to what we did 10 years ago. Do you think this is in line? Do you think this is a good, or do you think that we need to bid this out? And you have Mike McDonald's report in front of you from HRC that basically says, this is your best bet, this is your option. And in his recommendation that we go ahead and accept Northern's contract and get the well put in place. You know, at this point, if all goes according to plan, if Eagle allows all the permitting, and Eagle has already said that because they know Northern Pump and Well, and they know that they understand our water system, they will help us expedite the permitting process. They're still required, we're gonna do it, but they certainly, you know, have a little more leeway knowing that we've got somebody that we can be confident in their repairs. We're still looking at a repair for well number 5 coming on maybe June.
Right now, at best, we're running on Band-Aids, right?
To say the least.
Sounds like it.
And then if it's 6 months to get through the process, to get in their queue to get the work done is going to be another 6 months because everybody is busy, everybody's buried, and especially when you're a limited contractor like this that specializes in something, you're going to be looking at probably another 3 to 6 months at best before you even get somebody. Then you're dealing with somebody from outside the state, most likely.
That is what HRC indicated to me. The only other one that I called, or actually had Tim Metz call, was Lalone well, because I believe they did some test wells in Washington Township. So I Googled them, I said, can you call them? What do they need? Can they use the specs from well number 3, which is what I have right here, these drawings? And they said, nope, we would have to have a whole schematic done by your engineering firm in order for them to give us a bid from their company. And it's really not even what they do.
Yeah. If it's not what they do,
They do the work, but that's not what their specialty is.
and if you look at the breakdown that Northern gave us, there's a lot of work going on for the money. It doesn't seem like the quote is out of line.
Not when you compare the quote to what we paid 10 years ago for well number 5,
Right.
which is functioning and operating just fine of $147,000.
And then to have HRC write the spec up
Right.
and do all that work to get the quote ready, that's going to cost us,
Oh,
The difference anyways.
To ship it out, you mean? Yeah.
yeah.
Right. I just didn't want you to think that I didn't do any homework, right?
did a
I
lot
spent a
of homework.
significant
You did a
amount
lot.
of
No,
time
you did.
trying to figure out what our best options are. It seems like this is certainly not ideal, right? If we wanted to be proactive, we would go ahead and have it designed and then bid out for future, wells. But even that cost of $20,000 to $30,000 is, it's a significant expenditure.
We missed our opportunity to be proactive in 2009.
Yes, we
Right.
did. Yes, we did.
Exactly.
Yes,
Well,
we
my-
did.
My guess is
So-
if the water got shut off, we might have a few more people at our next meeting than we have tonight.
If we didn't have any water, yes, that would probably be the case. People would not be happy with us that didn't have any water. And, if we don't do, there still could be a lot of things that go wrong with this. Again, right now, usage is fairly low in the winter months because no one's really using outdoor watering But certainly Tim is telling me that those two pumps, well number 3 and well number 5, they work in tandem. So when that level drops in the, water tower, they're both working to keep that to the level that it needs to fill to meet our capacity. If well number 5 fails at this point, or until this, a new well can be dropped in, we're going to have a significant problem.
I apologize is the Eagle tie-in, is that the tie-in to the city water system?
That's the Great Lakes Water.
Okay,
So
okay.
Eagle is what used to be known as the DEQ. Now, they're the
okay.
licensing, right.
Sorry about
That's
that.
okay.
Yeah,
They're the
you're right.
regulatory authority that we have to answer to, and all of our testing and water quality goes through them.
The pump that's across from McDonald's is what number?
I don't even know
Okay.
what the number is.
I just thought I'd use the
It says 2,
name
in
of
one
it.
of these report, it calls it 2.
Would it be worthwhile in conjunction with this to maybe open that pump up and, get some things running through the system and see about clearing those pipes out?
Tim is very nervous about that because, one, there is a lot of buildup. I mean, it's been years since water has flown to the north, like I indicated. All that water is coming south. So any buildup that was in those pipes, he's also concerned when you pressurize that to actually supply, that's going to put a significant strain on that infrastructure, which is the oldest infrastructure that we have.
So that would be
They still
maybe a
test the
separate
pump.
project
They still
someday.
test it, right? They go
Right.
over there and they monitor it. So it
That's
is
like-
the source of water.
That's what I guess
Right.
I'm looking at as a separate project, because otherwise, if we don't know that, if we're just working in fear, we
To
can't
know
do
what we
anything.
have
We're
to
just,
do,
we're
right.
just pros.
The water
So-
quality is still tested from that well. But it would require, if we do have to switch over, then there'll be, probably a significant boil alert in the village, and a lot
rust
of
and everything.
testing. All the bits that would dislodge will probably end up in people's faucets and clogging shower heads.
You have iron again.
You'll have iron because it won't get treated. The infrastructure just isn't there to even have that water flow over to the IRP in the meantime. So,
How would the funding of this, as far as paying for it?
right, so this is considered a capital asset. It is not a repair. So it does not affect our budget at all. It goes on our balance sheet as an asset, and then we take depreciation of that. In our capital water asset management plan, we have $580,000 saved up, so that money would come from there. So we won't have to borrow any money to utilize that. It obviously, puts a strain on that budget for future projects, but that's why we increased the utility rates that we did, so that those enterprise funds, because they are from our enterprise fund, they have to be self-sufficient. We can loan money to the water, which is what we've done every year. We've always supplemented that out of our general fund. But this year, Paul Bailey said, you have to stop doing that. If you want good accounting procedures, you have to make your enterprise funds self-sufficient. So we've adjusted the rates. Those won't go into effect until actually this current billing cycle that we're just starting now. So you won't see that rate until the January bill.
So Northern can start this within 30 days after Eagle's approval. Is this a paid in full upon completion, or is there any
Payment plan?
financing option that could
I
stretch
did
it?
not ask that question.
I don't know if it's even viable or if it's something we want to even entertain, but
I did not ask that question, what their terms were. I just knew that we had the cash in the bank.
yeah. I mean,
And so I was,
It's smarter to do
comfortable
it.
that, I
smarter
wouldn't
to do
think it would be
that way.
paid up front. I'm probably, and as you build,
Right. It'll probably cost more if you stretch it out.
but I don't know the
Christine?
answer to that.
Could you say that again? I guess I misunderstood. I thought that the rates weren't increasing until January, but you're saying you'll see that in that bill, like the increase is now, and we'll
Yes.
see it in January?
Right.
Okay.
For that January
okay.
bill.
I misunderstood that.
Okay.
Justin, I saw your hand up. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I know you mentioned it, but I wonder, have we looked into switching over to Great Lakes? I mean, have we got a cost or an analysis on that?
My early analysis would be just the testing alone from Eagle would be about $100,000. to even see if our infrastructure could handle that, as well as probably another interconnect. I spoke with Washington Township because they're planning on bringing their water pipe up to 32 Mile Road. And so I asked about another interconnect that would help us feed maybe the south end of town. We already have one by Amanda Moore. So while it's an option, that would be a plan for years down the road. Because I know a lot of people are questioning, the water. Everybody has to have a water softener. And certainly our water meets all of, the standards that Eagle has saying it has to meet. But it's certainly, not ideal for a lot of the new families that are moving in. They're finding it sort of less than desirable. But the rates also reflect that. I mean, we do not have to pay the per gallon charge that Great Lakes Water charges, and you see that on the industrial side because they are serviced by Great Lakes Water over on Powell Road.
Yeah, because, you mentioned, I think you said well 5 is going to need maintenance also coming up soon?
Well, we look at them, every 3 years as needed as a good thorough inspection. I would have to see when the last time well 5 was inspected. It hasn't been cambered as far as I'm aware,
Well, I
but
thought
certainly.
you mentioned that it was going to need maintenance.
It's preventive maintenance,
Right.
inspection and preventive maintenance.
Yes, they always come in, they check the flows,
Scheduled
right.
Yeah, they're inspected.
And that's sort of what happened when they checked the flows from well number 3, and they noted that the flow was really low. So why is the flow low? So then they thought, well, we have to no choice but to go in and camera it, and they detected that the filter is full of sand. So the well had dropped low enough that it was actually pumping sand, and it clogged the filter. So
My last thing would be, did they give you like a life expectancy on the new system or on our current one, the well 5? Do you have any input on how long we could expect that to last? Because the last one looks like it was about 20 years, maybe a little bit more than that. Are you going to get that out of the one that was in 2010?
well, that's the hope, right? 20 to 30 years. Yep, that's the hope. But our water is corrosive. There's a lot of lime, there's a lot of scale, and that's basically what pitted well number 3 and perforated that casing. So we just have to be very vigilant.
So whatever 20 years we can plan our budget on replacing a well or a system.
Yep. Was there any other questions? Yes.
Is there no way of putting in a shut-off or a drain system to the old well to empty these pipes before they go into the main water supply? To use that well again while we're repairing the other one?
I'm not sure I'm not sure I follow.
You're seeing the big problem with the old well that hasn't been used in years out by
Right.
McDonald's.
Yes.
Has so much sediment in it, or they're worried about pressurizing those lines. Is there no way of draining those lines before they go into the main village supply and homes to clean those pipes out?
I would think that there's probably an area that you could stop it midway, but you're going to have to go through that Van Dyke infrastructure to start the flow of water going north. So while you may be able to isolate a certain area of it, it's still not going to help feed, it still can't get through the iron removal plant to be treated like our water is now.
Well, it seems like you say we have no option but to fix this well 3. But in doing so, we're going to put a lot of pressure on this well 5.
Well
that works
5.
in tandem with this.
Yes. And so the other thing that comes into play is mixing water sources. So we're not certain if the aquifer that we currently have for well 5 is the same water source that the well down by McDonald's uses. So somewhere, Tim was trying to locate a GIS map to tell me exactly what water source underground that taps into, but that's a concern that Eagle also has, that you cannot mix water sources. So you can't bring Great Lakes water and then still have water fed into our water tower from our aquifer to make sure that maintains. Yep.
Does pump 3 get shut completely down when this work is being done?
Pump 3 is,
not pump-
well 3 isn't, they didn't put the pump back in. When they went
Okay,
in
so
and
it's
they did
down
the
now.
camera, it's not functioning right
So
now.
pump 5 is all we're on
Yes.
now?
Notice the decrease in water supply.
Okay, so then, okay.
Yep.
So we literally are running on a single pump.
Yes.
For the
So time
entire-
time was critical, and so,
So should we
Yep.
continue
Well, I'd like to make,
should we wait a little less time and just make the motion? Or, I mean, it's a lot of money, but it's also something that's absolutely got to happen.
I'd like to make the motion that we move forward with this,
With-
with Northern.
with the proposal from Northern
with the
Pump and Well,
proposal, Yeah.
164, 578.95.
Correct.
Support.
So we have a motion by Bartholomew, we have support by Poznanski. Can you do a roll call, please?
Bartholomew,
Yes?
Poznanski,
Yes.
Seidel,
Yes.
Hart,
Yes.
Edwards,
Yes.
President Melzan.
Yes.
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay. Is there any other comments from the floor? Questions?
Just while addressing this issue, I think we should also address the issue, if we have the funds or it's financially feasible, to either put in another well so we're not driven to this option in the future, or connecting this to the iron filtration plant and regularly using that pump at some point in time.
Yeah, I agree. So what I suggested to Mike McDonald at HRC is next spring, when we come to our goals and objectives workshop before we adopt our budget, was that he provide me a written request so that we can take a look at that expenditure to see if we want to budget for that, because that wouldn't be a capital asset where putting this well in is not in our budget, but we would certainly have to budget for that. So we didn't budget in this fiscal year, but I do think that it's wise to look at that, and so we will in the springtime for sure.
I'm sorry, can I clarify, when you say wise to look at that, are you talking about the pump by McDonald's or a whole new?
Another new well.
A whole new well.
We had entertained an offer to actually sell that old well. The old owner, the Bowerman family, had come and asked us to actually vacate that well, and there
'Cause
just
they want
wasn't
the
any
property,
monetary,
right.
right, there wasn't any monetary incentive for us to do that, but certainly, given this scenario, I really don't think that it fits into our long-term goals, but worst case, we may have to use it, so right now, we don't want to, I guess we would be grateful that we have it.
What is our commitment to the customers? Because we have customers that are outside of the village down there, a few customers. So what is our obligation? Are we obligated to continue that older infrastructure for them, or?
Curiously enough, I actually had a conversation with Mark, and I don't mean to throw you under the bus about this, because as part of that discussion with Washington Township, we had a user that needs water service whose property is located in Washington Township, and it can't be serviced by Washington Township infrastructure. Likewise, we have a user in the village that wants to be on Great Lakes water, that we don't service that area. So he wanted to switch off Romeo, go to Washington Township, and then a Washington Township property come on the villages, which is what sort of initiated a 425 dialogue between myself, Tim Metz, and Dan O'Leary. And so we talked about that. And part of that incentive was for Washington Township to take those users, Barbara Ann, Jean Ann, those along Van Dyke, so that the liability was off of us for repair, because they are in Washington Township. Remember when we all used to be 48065, right? And the post office came in and said, well, now you're 48094 and you're 48095 and you're no longer Romeo. Somehow that all got divvied up, and I asked Mark, like, how did this even happen? Because we don't have a 425 that we could find, and to the best of his knowledge.
Right, the village doesn't have a continuing obligation to supply that water south of town to users outside of the village. If you look, you have an ordinance about charging different rates for users outside of the village. You have the infrastructure such as it is in place. I don't think you could wake up tomorrow morning and say, well, we're going to turn off the spigot and you don't get water anymore. But you don't have a contract with any of the individual users. You don't have a contract with Washington Township. You don't have a statutory or an ordinance obligation to continue to supply the water. But I do think if you acted precipitously and just turned it off, that would be a problem. So I think you would have to allow reasonable notice so that another water source through Washington Township, whether people would be allowed to drill their own wells, or whether they'd be required to connect to the Washington Township, the Great Lakes Water Authority system. I don't know, but you don't have to continue it. It would just be a matter of procedurally, how do you discontinue it? And there would have to be reasonable notice and an opportunity for the users to find an alternate source of water.
We should look at that.
Right, and Dan indicated in our conversation that Washington Township, would be willing to do that. They understand that they really are their users. They would like as many users on their water, as well, because they have a lot of infrastructure that they have to pay for.
Right.
So getting them off of ours, they would replace the water lines and bring everybody sort of up to date. And so that would alleviate some of our liability.
And obviously, there's some costs associated with maintaining and keeping that well.
It's,
Right.
well, not the well, but even the pipes are old.
Right, there's got to be
That's
some,
our
so if
oldest
we were able
infrastructure.
to your point, if we were able to reduce those costs, that would help.
Right. I don't know what the long-term, I guess I would have to do a study to figure out what it actually does cost us to, if it is well number 2, what annually, what do we pay for that? And then long-term, if we were to invest in well number
6,
7,
7, 8.
right? If the new one's going to be 6, I don't know if we're talking about 7, when would that ultimately pay for itself?
Right.
So being proactive. So we're looking at that, as well as that interconnect, which I think is kind of huge off of the water main coming from Washington Township, because if we do develop that campus, if we do have more users coming on, we'll need the Great Lakes water over there for Ford if they do end up developing that parcel, because there's quite a few acres over there, although we have 500 gallons in reserve, for them, but
Hey, thanks to you and Tim for actually doing a lot of legwork on this and giving us some
well, it's what we do. But yeah, so it's very important because water is sort of key.
Kind of critical.
And Tim will sigh a big sigh of, he'll breathe a big sigh of release. He really is quite nervous about this. So he's chomping at the bit to make sure that, everybody's taken care of. So we'll keep you updated and give you progress reports, and we'll go from there. Motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
All right, motion by Mr. Hart.
Support?
Support by Bartholomew. All in favor?
Aye.
Justin?
You guys made a motion in support. Did you guys actually vote?
She called the roll. Yep.
We didn't hear it.
Oh.
No, it was
roll call
unanimous.
vote. Yeah.
It was unanimous.
Yep, we're good. 6-0.